MTN, Africa's biggest mobile provider by subscribers, has warned that it expects annual profits could plunge by as much as 90% following the sharp devaluation of the naira. Here's the part of the earnings statement from the company. The financial results has been negatively affected by the sharp devaluation in the naira against the US dollar, impacting MTN Nigeria's financials, despite the operating company's solid underlying operational performance. Let's take a look at that performance as we look at the financials for full year 2023. Again, top line revenue was pretty healthy for MTN Nigeria. It wasn't, of course, until we get to the issues with the FX loss of about 740 billion. So there we go, 2.4 trillion naira, 22% growth. Operating profit, 5% growth at 773. And then, of course, that's where you get the FX loss coming in. And some of the other issues. We're very happy to have, once again, Mr. Modupe Kadri, Chief Financial Officer of MTN Nigeria, to join us. Good morning to you, sir. Thank you for joining us. The warning, how serious should we take it? Is it possible that something can happen to alleviate that?
Well, I think it's something that happened. We are all aware post the incoming, the new administration, and they announced the floating of the naira. Perhaps what most people may not have seen is the extent to which it has floated. And as you could see, during the year, it's moved from 460 levels to 907 at the end of the year. So that's actually what is causing most of the impact in terms of the unrealized losses for most people who have exposure to Forex on their balance sheets.
I'm glad you mentioned 900 and something by the end of the year. We are currently at 1,005 to 1,600 levels. What does that mean? I know I'm going too far in front now. What does that mean for your first quarter results, based on where the FX rate is now?
Well, to be honest, I like to stick to the FY23 results. Look, the reason is simple. Yeah. The situation is so fluid. As you could see, the central bank has been making some interventions. The CBN governor believes that the naira is undervalued. And you could also see it's been moving on from 1,700 to 1,314, whatever it is. So for us in particular, however, I think the key rate is the rates at the end of the period. So even though, for instance, in this key one you're talking about, the bulk of our obligations, the tower obligations, were locked in at the rates at the end of the year. So that's like 900. And it's going to apply to end of end of March, rather. So a new rate will kick in, depending on where it is. So if the government gets the measures under control, so some of this things may reverse. So that's why I don't think we should be fixated about the hurdles that goes on in between. Okay,
well, thank you. You've preempted my next question, because what a lot of folks have been going on about is that 740 billion naira loss, which wiped out shareholders' funds. Now, I guess what I was going to ask was, does that mean would you embark on a rights issue, something with capital raising? What would be the plan now to replenish that?
Well, it's early days. What the Communist Act requires is that we should have an EGM. So an EGM will be scheduled in due course, possibly by the end of late April. And then the board of directors will then unpack the plans as to how they're going to redress that particular issue. So, like I said, it's early days, but plans are ongoing, and things they will communicate to the shareholders what the plans will be in terms of options available.
Can you help us with the tower leases, I guess, in terms of your FX exposure? I think we understand that they are indexed to the US dollar. How does that work with the tower leases?
Okay, so the tower lease is basically, you have a portion that is indexed, like you said, but they're all naira contracts. So basically what they've done is, at the start of the quarter, you have a variable portion that is tied to that. About 70% of the tower leases, at least for the major lease operator. So every quarter that resets. So depending on where the naira is at that point, then you actually have a difference between what you booked in at the time of inception to what the rate is, and then you pay. So you have two effects. One, your OPEX will increase if the naira is getting weaker, and of course then you also have a unrealized exchange loss based on the unexpired portion of those leases, which the accounting standard requires us to book. So those are the two effects that you will have on that. So depending on how the naira goes, it goes up and down. But like I did say earlier, most of the Forex losses that you see on the books are actually unrealized. So they're non-cash. Yeah. About 83% actually unrealized. So if the naira recovers, then that comes back to where it went out from.
See, this is why the Chief Financial Officer position is so important. Thank you for breaking that down and giving us clarity on that. So just still further, we understand that, I mean, of course, IHS is the lease operator here that you were working with, but we understand that MTN was moving to, I think it's American Tower Corporation. What's the situation there with? And I guess this is about cost savings, right? In terms of your portfolio. So can you help us with that?
Okay, beyond what we put out, and I must advise yourself and myself that we shouldn't be sub judice because that matter is in court.
Okay.
There is a court injunction in that effect. But effectively, what happens as our lease expires, we also seek optimization from existing players in the market. So, of course, in this particular case, ATC was one. We went through a competitive tender process, and they won. So. But, you know, we leave the courts to sort out what's going to go down in that space. But that was just the objective. So each lease portfolio we have has a defined tenure. So normally the ideal thing to do is to, you know, renegotiate or review those tenures, review those terms to make sure that they are in sync with the economic realities that we face. So in this particular case, we had to take a decision to move to those sites to ATC. But, you know, we'll see what happens.
All right, thank you for that. Cash flow for the company, just to highlight this, it did increase by about 11%. And I guess where the income statement ends is where your cash flow statement begins. 631 billion naira for this, you know, for 2023 financial year. Healthy number. Should that reassure investors? What's the takeaway from that kind of cash flow? How do you, you know, what's the takeaway for this figure?
So the key message is simple, is this. The company has strong underlying operating results and generated by the cash flows that you've reported, or that was reported. However, it's facing some headwinds from the macroeconomic conditions, which we have to work with the government and all stakeholders to get under control. So in terms of, because the real elephant in the room, and I'm sure I've seen this in all other industries, that every other person is able to pass on their costs to us.
Right.
We've not been able to pass our own costs on to, you know, the subscribers. So that's why you have shrinking margins, and that's why we have to go back to that discussion on how the industry is going to be regulated in terms of tariff increases. So for instance, if I were to go further, like if you were to compare FY23, even from the government side, so they introduced the VAT on tower leases. Now just look at the compound effect that's going to have. As your tower lease rentals grows up, you're paying a VAT 7.5 on that, and you're not able to pass on those costs. So you're actually talking about sustainability issues in the industry, which need to be addressed at the appropriate quarters.
Certainly. Well, I mean, as you're the biggest player, and there's quite a big gap between you and second place in terms of subscribers. If you did pass on those costs, could you risk losing subscribers to lose your position? I
don't think it's about losing subscribers, and I don't think that's a fair question, to be honest.
Yeah.
The reality is that everybody else has passed on their costs, and
you haven't.
And we haven't. And the industry just can't survive.
Yeah.
So even, you talked about us being the biggest player. What about the other smaller players in the industry? They're going to die if interventions are not made in that space. So don't look at MTN as a standalone.
Gotcha.
But you have to look at it in the context of the industry, ecosystem, and the survival. And that's actually the key decision. To the extent that there has to be fair prices. So if you also look at the deregulation of the petroleum sector, you passed on those PMS costs to the to subscribers. People are adjusted.
Right.
I didn't stop them from driving their cars. Maybe they cut down the usage or things like that. But you're actually talking about the sustainability of the investments required. So if you look at the telco industry, for instance, if you look at our results, take 5G coverage, for instance, went up from 3% to 11%. That's a huge amount of investment, not words of almost $120 million. Now, how are they going to monetize that investment if you don't have the business case?
Gotcha.
So that's the issue. So as we're going to be demanding for fair services, better customer services, we also have the ability, we need to have the ability to pay for those services to give these customers the experience that they want.
Fair point. Speaking of 5G, since you mentioned it, what's about your capital expenditure plans for 2024? Does this FX issue overshadow that, or do you still plan to expand 5G? artificial intelligence, all those things you talked about last time we had you on the show.
Yeah, the reality is that as a business, you continue to explore your options. We have a strict capital allocation framework that allows us to determine where we put our capex. But the bottom line still is that ultimately it's the return to the shareholders. Now, if there's no investment case because of the terrible macroeconomic conditions that you face, it's going to be difficult to justify at the governance structures the required investments that you need to make those things happen.
Right.
But notwithstanding, by a mile, we're still, like I said, we've done a lot of investments in terms of what we've done. 4G went up, 5G went up, fiber assets are also going up. And so all these things are not just telling us that we are here to stay. I mean, MTN is not going anywhere. We're a critical part of the national fabric. And to the extent that, we also have this critical national infrastructure, I'm sure the government will also be paying attention.
Let me throw this at you on the FX side. This is a scenario. Nigerian firms will accept 3,000 naira to the dollar as long as it remains stable. Is stability the main issue, regardless of the rates that you want to see with the FX? What do you want to see from FX?
Well, I think, stability is one, because ultimately every business needs to plan. So once you know what your rates are, you can calculate what's your return on investment. And of course, you can then see what's the impact on the bottom line. But the flip side of that question goes, if you came into this country when your investment levels were at 180 to the dollar or less, and you're talking about 3,000 to the dollar now, then you need to see what's going to happen to have the right pricing structure to justify or to maintain or to sustain that level of investment. So I think, at least from a planning perspective, look, the only reason why we're having this discussion on negative reserves is because the Naira has moved from 460 to 900. If it moves from 900 to 2,000 or 3,000, then that's going to be another discussion. However, we can still do something about it as long as the Naira moves, you allow the industry to price appropriately to be able to sustain their businesses. Okay,
well, you preempted my next question then, because we're still in a transition period. The Naira is still trying to find its level. So how are you going to shield yourself? What's the strategy as we move through this period with the FX? Look,
at the end of the day, for us, we've been here many times, so it's not in our DNA. So, just like the last maybe incident will have been the COVID-19 pandemic. Right. And, we had, of course, not driven by FX, but at least you had uncertain market conditions, and we are bold enough to make the right decisions to make the right investments. So in this case, I think it's just being streetwise, manage your costs, always invest in what's adding to the bottom line. Of course, fair pricing, you need to make sure that there's a return on investment too. And of course, the government also has to play its part to make sure that these things are stabilized in due course, because without that stability is not only about currency stability, right. It's about everything. Look, inflation at 30%. I mean, if you looked at the numbers, what was your year-on-year growth in revenue? So, rule number one in business, you don't grow below inflation. Right. The moment you're growing below inflation, you're actually receding. Yeah. And that should be the benchmark which you should, the government in policies making should look at these things.
Just a minute ago, I guess I have to ask you, so what's your outlook on the economy? Are you cautiously optimistic? How do you see things, turning out for 2024?
Well, I will be cautiously optimistic because the government, like I said elsewhere, as long as the government is not laying back and surrendering to the conditions we face today and are actually working towards it, I think you've seen that MTN was not alone in terms of the huge losses recorded. And that's a statement that industry needs to be protected. And in as much as the government is not going to shy away from their responsibilities of also protecting the industry by making the right policies or creating that environment, then there's no reason why anybody should be saddened or whatever. It's just a blip, it's a phase. The president has said so much. We're going to go through this pain, and we're going to go through this pain together. But it's also important that whilst going through that pain, we don't die. And people don't die because, there's no point in having a successful operation and the patient is dead.
Gotcha. Excellent way to round off the show. Mr. Modupe Kadri, the Chief Financial Officer, MTN Nigeria. It was a pleasure having you, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.